Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales. This could be due to a lack in confidence, comfort, just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers. We know we can. We complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help folks like you improve at problem solving and sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking. I'm Mike Simmons. I'm the host of the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Today, we have Craig Sybert. Craig is the senior systems consultant at Envolve Media and producer and creator of the Musing Podcast. Craig Sybert, it is awesome to have you on the podcast this week. How are you doing?
Awesome. How about you?
I am doing great. That was my attempt at an FM radio voice. How did that sound?
I don't know. We'll let the listeners judge as I keep talking throughout this whole one and decide who's got the better FM voice.
Well, I know you've got the better FM voice, and I know you've got the range to go to different levels with it. We had a conversation on Clubhouse a couple of weeks back. Actually, once this goes live, it'll be about a month or so back. And you joined one of the Find Your Catalyst discussions, and we talked about creativity, art, music, life. We had some pretty wide-ranging discussion. What do you think of it?
Wow. So it's hard that I don't ever get to mix that into what I do now. I mean, I'm in the training and learning development field for the most part now, and I don't get to mix that in. I mean, yes, I use it from time to time. I do digital design, I do graphic design, I do logo design on the side, and I still play music, for local church, but I've, been playing on my own a little bit for over 20, 30 years at this point. I don't get to tie that in very much. And I think making those connections was really nice. It was nice to see those connections between that and a positive attitude in work and a positive attitude in creation and meld those two together. It was really interesting to see that and also get feedback from people that were in the room on it too.
One of the things I try to do with this podcast, or an aim with the podcast, is to connect the dots between the work that we all do and the work that all of us do. And what I mean there is there's not a lot of difference between what I do when it comes to leading sales teams, building sales teams, working inside organizations, and what other professionals in the marketplace do when it comes to developing learning solutions, implementing learning products, working in project management. I think we tend to get so focused on how unique each of our roles are that we miss that the reality is, in a lot of cases, we're doing a lot of the same things. We may just call them something a little bit different. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree on that. I think we dipped a lot into that in that conversation as well, but I think people end up taking themselves out of their work. And sometimes that's the opposite of what they should be doing. They really should be putting themselves into that work. I'm a general people person, from the get-go of who I am. And you and I have had this conversation before. I'm kind of letting people in the back door to our conversations, but you and I have had this conversation before. I hate doing sales. I'm on a sales podcast and I hate doing sales, but it's because of some coaching by you on the fact that I'm not selling, that I'm trying to be a solution. And then it started putting me in it. It started putting me into solving people's problems and talking to people. And, all the way large up to, creating an entire training department for a business, all the way down to, how do you get to the closest McDonald's? Those are both instructions. Those are both training. Those are both teaching somebody, and they're both doing the same thing. And that's how I do my life. When I train people, I talk to them. I try and give them the best visual I can. I try to give them landmarks when I'm giving those descriptions. And then I've ramp it up to that high end. And I'm trying to make sure that people get the right training to do their right job through me giving them the details and me giving them the landmarks on their training as well. So yeah, I think people take it out too much. I think people take themselves out of it too much.
Why do you think they do?
It's a hard work mentality. I mean, it's one of those things that kind of people have really been taught all their lives that, you go to work and you put on a suit, you put on a tie, you put on a face, and you go and do the job that you're paid to do. And I'm not saying everybody does that. I'm just saying that that's been a mentality for work for a really long time. I mean, it's not something that's brand new. And I think we're slowly starting to get out of that, especially with, people working from home and working in their pajamas and got their kids running through the back door. And we're on video on Zoom right now. You can see lightsabers in my corner, guitar neck sticking out between them, and, Lego props on my desk. And that's real. I think it's people are starting to get that even through this pandemic and realizing that, that's you. everything that is you makes that job better. But yeah, I think it's just a mentality that we've been stuck with for decades.
I think it's one of the really cool things about going in the home now as video calls take place. You start to realize there's a layer or two deeper as it relates to each of the people that you've got an opportunity to work with, or each of your customers that you probably didn't have perspective on because you failed to ask or failed to observe. And I can hear kids in the background when I'm on a call with someone, and at a time where I might not have asked how old their kids are, I now will ask how old their kids are, or could be any number of things. Back in the day when you'd go into offices and you'd meet with people, I would look at the bookshelf and I'd see what kind of books do they have up on the bookshelf. And one of the things I'm quickly doing is to see if there's a book on a bookshelf behind someone that is either written by an author that I like or is actually a book that I've read and really enjoyed. And then I can ask a question, and that starts to break the ice a bit more than, so tell me about your weekend, or do you have plans in the summer? There's a bit more substance to being able to find some common footing with another person when I know that, hey, they're into Star Wars and they built some lightsabers, and the extent of a lightsaber that I had might have been the Reynolds aluminum foil wrap roll, or one of the rolls that you would use, what is Christmas wrapping paper for. That would be the extent of a lightsaber. And Craig here has actually gone through the process of designing lightsabers, the authentic would be LucasArts method. So, but that's a level of detail. And then you see the level of detail, and then you can ask some questions and you start to appreciate what people are focused on, where they're working. So,
well, I think that gives you an insight to who they are too. I mean, you don't, when you're working with someone in an office, yes, the people that you're working directly with, you kind of get to know each other because you're naturally talking with each other and sharing stories. Like you said, if you go into these meetings, if I go into a meeting, I'm in training, but I go into a meeting with, IT, and I don't know these people from anything, but when you are now having a meeting with me through this Zoom, and you can see that I've put a meticulous detail into that. I put meticulous detail into what I've created. And now you know that that's a little bit of me. I'm a detail-oriented person. I'm somebody who picks out the details and does that. So yeah, I think that sharing that life insight is starting to help people understand what they do in business better. And it also relates to people better. It makes you relate to people better. And it's hard to do when, so a lot of my training is actually online where I don't see people. We're really not sharing video, so I don't get that. But I still take that attitude to it. I still take that personal attitude to it. And it helps smooth over that whole feeling of not wanting to sell something, but making it a solution instead of just trying to be the salesperson.
All right, I'm going to take advantage of you for just a little bit here.
Great.
Only because you've opened it up now twice. You've talked about not wanting to sell something. What is wrong with sales?
Now I don't think anything. Now when I hear people talk, well, no, because of what you've kind of talked me through this. And, I'm, pump you up here because before this, if you were to ask me that, I would say they're pushing. They don't care about me. They just care about what they're putting on the table. They want money. That's that, if you're talking about the common, things that you look at when people say they don't like sales or salespeople, that's what comes out. And that was me. But in going through the process of talking to you on a regular basis and hearing your podcasts and hearing your methods and how you kind of push that, I've really become better attuned to what it is instead of what I thought it was or what it should be. And compared to what I thought it was. I mean, there's still people out there that's their drive is they want to check a box and they need to sell you something immediately or they're going to lose their job. And there's going to be people out there like that. But I think the good ones are getting that attitude that I learned by having discussions with you, that it's not selling, that it is helping. It's a solution. So yes, I was one of those people that hated the phone call that came in or hated the check mark or, didn't listen to the first sentence I put out there that, told them everything they needed. And they're asking the same questions and something I told them when they got on the phone. And I went through that. I was a call center person. I worked for Geico as a call center person taking claims. And if you weren't listening to them when they spoke the first sentence about I just had an accident, they're usually going to give you some details there that down the road, if you're following that chart and following that checklist and you ask that question again that you've already got an answer to, that's where you lose people. That's where you lose. And that's how I felt about sales up until recently too. So
it's a key piece. That's where you lose people. You lose people because they think all of a sudden that you just weren't listening to them or you didn't care enough to take good notes, or you didn't care enough to pay attention to what is going on. And now some people will do that just because they're a bit distracted and they might be multitasking. Maybe they're looking at Slack while the conversation is going on. That's not a good thing to do. Or maybe they're checking email while something's going on, or they're reading something on Twitter or whatever the heck it is. Like, be present. Be present. And one of the approaches there, and Camille Clemens has been on the podcast a couple of times, but she likes to talk about in the context of be where your feet are. And I forget where that original quote comes from, but I attribute it to Camille just because I've heard her say it so many times. So be where your feet are. And if we are there, then we can see the nonverbal that people share. You can see when someone smiles, or when, Craig was saying that he actually, I forget exactly how you put it, but you put something to the effect of your different perception of sales. And I gave you a look that was a little bit weird, which created another response. And there's just so many different ways that we can communicate to each other, both through whether it's the stuff that I've got on my whiteboard behind my shoulder, or it's the stuff that I have out. I don't show people what my desk looks like. It's a madhouse. And I like to think that it represents or demonstrates a high level of creativity. I think Einstein said that once, that a messy desk is an indicator of creativity, or whether that's been misattributed to him or not. And I actually, as Craig pulls up his Rubik's Cube, I've got a Rubik's Cube somewhere.
Oh, sorry.
Too. So you see distracting things that just shiny things that jump out. So the reason I asked Craig to come on the podcast, one, the conversation was awesome a couple of weeks ago on Clubhouse. And it was unfortunate that not everybody could hear it because either they don't have access to Clubhouse or they weren't online when we did that. So I thought we'd come back together and talk a bit about some of the high points. And one of the high points for me was the discussion of the creative process and of what creativity means to Craig. And I want to start there. So what is creativity? And then let's kind of get into some more detailed conversations around the creative process, your education, how it applies to all of the things that you do. So what is creativity?
Well, I don't know if I can, for lack of better words and making a pun, I don't know if I can paint the same picture we did the other day, but my history's I went to college for fine arts. I painted, I drew, I did digital design, I did photography. I studied the history of art. So I took a traditional fine arts degree in college, and it was the best thing I could have ever done. I was always been interested in art anyways. I used to airbrush t-shirts. Yeah, that's going way back. But once I got into that, I really learned that, and by being told in my first critique by my painting teacher that you're too graphic, you're too characteristic, you're creating characters instead of actually making a painting. You're not getting your voice out there. You're just taking an image of a person and making it in the position you want. He said, you really need to go back to the basics, study the people that have created art over the last, 3,000-4,000 years, and look at the basics, and then also learn to do your structure better. He said, it's not bad putting people in your paintings, but you need to learn structure. You need to learn the basics. You need to go to take a drawing class. You need to take an anatomy class to actually learn muscles and bone structure and learn that before you could actually build on it and then go crazy with it. And I think that was one of the things we really kind of honed in on is you can be creative. You can put things out in the world, paintings, music, art, poetry, whatever you're looking at. But unless you have the basics and the base of what that art is or what that creation is, and again, apply this to kind of whatever you're talking about, you can't really start playing with it. You can't really start being creative with it until you know the basics. And, to tie that back into what I do, I can't create a 70-page course with knowledge checks in the middle and a quiz at the end and how that quiz interacts with a learning management system without knowing how to use that software. If I don't know how to use that software the right way, I'm going to create something that is horrible. I'm going to create, as we always say in the industry, the next button, the next button, the next button is going to be on every page. And I'm not going to think of creative ways of moving the person to the next idea. It could be through them, just interacting with a piece on the screen instead of clicking the next button. But if I don't know those tools, if I don't know how to use those tools when I start, I can't be creative with what I design in the end and actually start reaching people, get in touch with people and get people interested in that course.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into the design aspect. And one of the things you highlighted there is the way that a lot of us really despise how learning, specifically compliance type training, has been put together is in the series of next buttons. And you have to review 2 hours of content. You have to make sure that you've viewed all pieces of information. If for whatever reason you are not moving at an appropriate speed, it will kick you out of the course. And if you are moving too fast, it will slow you down. So you talk, though, about other ways that you can create interactions that happen to get people to the next step without it feeling like they're just clicking a next button. What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, that comes back to that creativity. It comes back to thinking things through deeper than the surface, to being able to put something out there that's not necessarily like everything else. And, I hate to be that way, but you want to create something original. At some points in time, you're going to have a next button. At some points in time, you're going to have a knowledge check 7 pages in. It's kind of ironic. I'm going to go on a slight tangent here, but one of the things that I had to learn about the programs I was creating was how to keep people from going backwards, or how to keep people from scrolling to the end of the video and still getting credit for the video. And, people are actually going to be more creative in cheating the system than they are going to be in creating those courses. But to step back into it, I think that there's always going to be a next button available to you. But if you take that next button, you're settling for the thing that's been done all the time. And there are much more creative ways to interact with people. It also relies on you keeping up with current trends as well. I mean, if you build a website, I used to build websites in the late 90s, and a website from the late 90s compared to what it is today is completely different. But if I hadn't kept up with the look and feel of what websites are, and I just wanted to step into creating one, either with like Wix or WordPress or something like that, I would be lost. So it also takes you kind of paying attention to what's going on around you with current trends and current ways of doing things. So being creative at how I get my idea to someone is what moves me away from that next button. And then I have to start thinking, well, how are they interacting with this particular page? Is it by color? Is it by text? Are they looking at a certain field on the page? Are they doing a drag and drop? How are they interacting this page? And now, how can I turn that into moving them to the next thought without them consciously clicking on something, or something they do, or something they turn, or a piece of text that they hover over now gives them the key to open to that next page? You really just got to be creative. But again, you're back to the tools. If you don't know the tools on how to do, you might be able to have the idea that you want to do this to make somebody move to the next. But if you don't know the tools, you're not going to be able to build that and put that in practice. I think I got off tangent there. Did I get off tangent, or am I pretty close?
No, it's really good. It's really good stuff. And what it highlights for me are the variables that play into the work that you're doing. And one of those variables are the tools. The other variable might be, and this might be a tool, but the medium for which the information is being shared. Another variable might be the type of information. Another variable might be the type of people who are consuming the information. Yep. So if we're trying to get creative in the way that we engage with others, we should be considering these variables. And if we're just making it up as we go along, we're improvising, and there's a time and a place for improvising. But if we're just making things up as we go along and we don't understand how to properly use the tools, our risk for creating a lot of disruption and mass chaos increases significantly. And maybe what we end up doing is creating a bunch of garbage. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point to bring up. I think we even talked about that on Clubhouse, about the difference between, using oils to using pastels to using, acrylics to using gouache, and, knowing which tool to use at the right time and knowing how to use that tool. And some people specialize in oils, and that's what they do. And that's kind of what makes you best at what you do. But it's still, you're right, the audience is really a big part of it. And creativity, and I'll go back to a horror story. I won't name the place I came from that did that. But we had a new system coming in. We had a brand new HRIS system. It was a brand new, where everybody puts their time in and where all the information comes out for their payroll. We were going to teach everyone a new way of putting their time into the system from scratch. It was brand new. And then this is a system they had for like 30 or 40 years. So I went into it with the idea of, I'm going to gamify it. And this is, when gamification was really hot, when it was just starting to hit well. And I thought it would be a great idea for people because they're coming into a new era of what they're learning. They're going to be learning something brand new, something that's taking over something that was archaic. So it might be a good time to kind of get them to play with it and get them to feel a little more excited about what they're taking for training to get into it. It was cut in half and they're like, no, we're not going to do that. And I was really confident I knew my audience at that point in time, but I was dealing with an entire team who they didn't look at the field and say, this is a company now that is really, really skewed towards lower aged individuals in the system. They're going to be looking for that type of stuff. It's not really a company anymore where we've got, 40, 50, 60 and above in our company as the large amount of people. We've spent the last 10 years restructuring this entire company and bringing new people in, young people taking phone calls, young people getting management positions because they're being trained to be managers. And it was just a big mistake on their part. And it's actually one of the reasons I left the company. But knowing your audience is definitely one of the things that you have to do for picking the right tool, not necessarily even the right creativity. You can have the creative ideas and that might be the right fit for that audience. But if you don't have the right tools or the knowledge for those tools, it's just going to fall flat. It's not, you might have the idea, it's partially out there, but you're going to lose people in the colors or the text or what are the interface that you've created because you didn't use the right tools. So they all tie in together.
I'm going to take a little bit of a leap here. What is the likelihood that if someone starts just creating in a vacuum without testing in front of an audience, that they actually hit the mark the first time they deliver whatever it is that they're going to deliver? Maybe it's the first time a song gets delivered or first time a course gets created or whatever it is. Is testing part of the process?
Yes. Well, okay. The first question was how many? I would say 1 in 2 million. I mean, we even had this discussion too. There's going to be phenoms out there. There are going to be people that pick up a guitar, have never played it, and they're going to do something weird with it, but it's going to make a song and it's going to sound amazing. So you're going to have those. But I would say that the norm is not going to be that way. The norm is not going to be somebody's going to pick up a tool, be able to use that tool the right way and influence people the right way. Because like we said, there's multiple parts. It's not just the tool. It's also the ideas. It's also the people that you're talking to. So I would say that, the likelihood is very slim, but it happens. It happens out there. Occasionally people strike gold that way.
Well, we were talking about it. I think when we were talking about it on the on that day, it was Eddie Van Halen picking up a guitar. I'm sure that thing just kind of fit his hands properly when he started playing. That's a bit different than me picking up a ukulele where I look like I've got 2 left hands and 4 thumbs.
But it's also now we're going to tie it back into that creative idea. It's people that don't have restrictions on their ideas of what something is. So, if Jimi Hendrix was given a guitar, he might not play it the traditional way. He might not even learn how to play scales or learn where notes are. He flipped the guitar upside down and he played it upside down. He took something that he saw and that he was interested in, and because of his creative nature, made something out of it. Now, he might have went back and kind of learned to, where the notes were and kind of play along with, a rhythm section and stuff like that. But people kind of get that sometimes. Sometimes they do pick up a tool and it's just natural for them to do it, but maybe they're not using that tool the right way. Maybe they're not using that tool for the way it was intended. And you get some of that too, but I don't know. I'm off on tangent. Reel me back in. I'm totally off on that. Yeah.
So how often have you heard someone say, you know what, I'm just not that creative?
All the time. And I don't believe it. I really don't.
Why not?
I don't. Because I think that everyone has interests. Everyone has an interest in something. And whether it be needlepoint or guitar or bird watching. You have an interest in it, and the creative side of that comes out if you put the passion that you have for that hobby or that thing you like into creating a different way of looking at that or a different way of experiencing that. I think the idea we used is, if people fly fish and they take that attitude and go into creating flies for the fly fishing, they know that the best. They know fly fishing because they do it and they know how to use the right tools to get the fish on the hook and how to tease them into that. Well, they would be the best person to create something like that. And then you're back to the creativity. Then they're actually creating something that's for them but it's also for other people because you're not the only one. I don't care what hobby you have or what interest you have, somebody out there has that same interest. And when you start getting creative with it and you start creating something that's involved in that, then you've put that out to the world. And then you're doing what I did with art, what I did with paintings, what I did with when I wrote songs I was in a local band for a while. When we wrote songs, I put those feelings out there through that music. Now, music's obviously an easy one for a lot of people have that same love and experience, but I think creativity is not something that everyone chooses to show or chooses to put out there to the world. But for people to say that they don't have any creativity, I don't believe it at all.
What's your process for breaking through the hard stuff? So like, let's say you're putting together a song, you're writing with a team of people, you're figuring out how, and I don't even, so well, let's talk about the process of building a song. Is it tough to build a song?
Okay. So then, no. Okay. Now, yes.
Why?
Distractions, I think. And when you put so much time onto a tool, you kind of get numb to what it can do. You really get into a groove of what it can do. I've been a rhythm guitar player for a very long time, but over the last 3 years where I play at church, they've kind of needed somebody to play lead. We lost 2 of our lead players. So I've been kind of relearning my tool, but for 15 years, I was stuck in playing rhythm. I was stuck in knowing chords and playing chords on the neck and not thinking about the single note stuff. So I think once you get into that tool too much, you kind of get into a groove on that tool and you kind of lose that. So if you talk about writing a song, everyone's going to be different. You're going to have 16 people write you emails and tell you that my method's the wrong way. But I wrote riffs. I wrote music. I wrote what I thought sounded good. I took them to the drummer and the drummer and I played them together. We wrote the song almost completely, just me and the drummer. Nobody else involved. The singer wasn't there. The bass player wasn't there. Nobody else was involved. We wrote those songs that way. And that was the comfortable way for me to write it because I didn't have the restrictions of, oh, well, this sentence isn't going to fit here. Or, we wrote these words and it doesn't really fit in this song. Well, the other way could be the same way. But that process for me was to write the music and let the music flow out of me. And then the singer was really good at putting words to those to match those up. Now, it's kind of funny because he took my poetry and actually matched it up to it. So it would end up being my words anyways, but I just never didn't write them for that specific process.
Would you have been able to do that if you didn't know how to use the tool?
No. Well, so again, we're going to bring another variable into this. Technology is another big variable in this because at that point in time, and I'm dating myself here, but early 2000s, you didn't have the ability to pull out my smartphone and use a keyboard and play, G, F, and C on the keyboard and start arranging them in what's the one, the Apple one for making music. I'm blanking. GarageBand. Yeah. You couldn't just pull up GarageBand and play a beat and then say, hey, drummer, this is kind of what I want it to sound like underneath. You couldn't do that kind of stuff back then. So the technology now is a little bit different. I don't technically need to know a lot about the tool to do it. But again, there's that separation between creativity and just putting something down. And we're going to get into that really tangent on music and me complaining about how music doesn't have a lot of heart today. But I feel that sometimes it's because of that. It's because people haven't learned the tool. So yeah, me personally, I think creativity gets lost if you don't know the tool well enough.
I mean, so imagine that just as you're going through this and you're listening to this, you should think about any of the tools that you apply to the work that you do. If you're constantly changing the tools that you're using, how much of a craftsperson or craftsman can you be relative to that specific tool? If you're constantly going through and being a generalist around all of these things, how do you become an expert in one specific area? What happens if you actually start to take a less is more approach and start applying the same tool consistently? How creative can you be in the application of those tools, process, framework, methods, all the stuff that we talk about on the podcast that I say over and over again, whether it's who, what, where, when, how, call planning, account planning, proposal planning, just apply simple frameworks and methods. And you'd be shocked at how creative you can get in the application of those tools in your process to accelerate the impact you have with your customer base and how quickly you'll be able to adapt and iterate to the changing needs of that customer base. The audience variable will require in many cases that you start to apply take a game-based approach to this, different playing cards to the scenario that you're in. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and apply it to music. I mean, if my instrument is guitar, I can take guitar and I can play rock, I can play country, I can play punk, I can play jazz on that guitar. But if I decide that I want to now play bass and play rock, I'm going to be okay because it's a stringed instrument, but I'm not going to be able to play the same way that, somebody who's been playing bass for 20 years is going to pick it up and play rock. Drums, give it up. I'm going to sit down at a drum kit. I have no idea what to do in general, but I can't play rock best on those other instruments. I can play rock best on the guitar. I can probably get by on some of those instruments. And like you said, I might be able to do a little bit, but if I use the right tool for me, if I use the right tool that I need to do my job the best, then I can start playing with that. And it does take some preparation in picking the right tool though. I mean, if you're talking about something like is it CRM? Is that the word, the right words?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. You can lay
So CRM, customer relationship management database. So it could be HubSpot, it could be Salesforce, it could be any Zoho, Sugar CRM. There are so many of these tools that are out there. Heck, even a spreadsheet works.
Well, but
what you need.
But the flexibility of the tool also allows you that time. And if you're talking about, being partially good at all those tools and not really exceeding in one, it does require you to kind of pick the right tool that has the flexibility. If I pick a 7-string guitar over a 6-string guitar, that gives me more flexibility. Well, I chose a 6-string guitar to start off with, so it's going to limit some of my creativity because I'm restricted by how many strings I got. The same way with spreadsheet to any other of the CRMs you just mentioned. Yes, you could still do what you need to do on a spreadsheet. You can even get creative a little bit with it, but you're going to be, at some point in time, you're going to run up against a wall. So yes, focus on something, but maybe also make sure that it's the right tool that allows you to expand when you do actually get proficient at it.
I have mad creative skills when it comes to pivot tables and VLOOKUP.
I just learned how to do VLOOKUP like the other day. So I know how to do any type of equation you could possibly imagine on Excel, but when it came to VLOOKUP, I had to have somebody train me because I had no idea what I was doing on that.
And once you started doing it, doesn't it feel like sorcery when you could pull these tables together or tables together?
Yes. Well, it was pivot tables and VLOOKUP were the two things I was learning. And those two things are just, but at that point, build a database. Just learn how to use Access. I learned how to use Access because I didn't want to build it all in. We're totally off on tangent again. Sorry.
No, but it applies like that. That was one of the ways I made a name for myself when I was at SmartForce way back in the day. I was able to take data that we had a hard time telling a story around and could help make it turn it into something meaningful using this cool thing called a pivot table. And then when we had two separate tables and we had to pull them together, and we could do that with VLOOKUP and pivot tables, wow, it looked like magic. And it really wasn't that hard. It was just one of those things where it just took the time of saying, okay, now I functionally understand how these things work together. VLOOKUP, and this is now boring everybody to death because we went from music to Excel. And that is a lot of range for a single podcast. And Craig was worried about showing his age earlier. He showed his age when he was talking about lightsabers and Legos, but I guess that's not appropriate. Now your lightsaber though is from the original trilogy, not from from any of the newer stuff. So there you go. There's the demonstrating age. Well, so go ahead, Craig.
No. I think that in touching upon that wizardry is something I got told by an artist years ago when I was actually trying to get almost done with school and doing my final pieces. I'd actually run into an artist that does Magic the Gathering cards. He's a very proficient artist. He's actually now works for Blizzard. He's an art director for a lot of their digital video that they put out. Amazing guy. And one of the things he told me about a piece I brought for him to look at was, it's a great piece, but I can't get lost in it. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, it was a piece that I'd created. It was like a diorama, but I'd left the sides open. So when you look through this little area through the top of it, it was just a small area where you could see down in and see mirrors reflecting. I'd left the sides open so he could see the real world. And part of being creative and helping people, like, to circle all the way back around to why you wouldn't use a next button, why you would want some other way of them moving into that next thought or idea, is you have to kind of get them to escape the reality. You have to kind of get them to escape that clicking that next button and looking for that next button and make it natural for them. So when you're talking about having the tools and being creative in those tools and putting those things out in the world with being creative with those tools, it also has to be an escape. It also has to be easy for them. It also has to be wizardry. It has to be something where now you've handed this to somebody and they don't need to know the wizardry. They need to know that in field F7, they're going to put the daily numbers, and then it's automatically just magically going to give them all the output from that data that's pulled behind the scenes. So yes, it's wizardry to us. And yes, it feels like wizardry when we're creating it, but that's also part of that tool. It's also part of being able to sell somebody something without them feeling like they're getting sold to, without giving them a solution, and they're not seeing it as a sale, they're seeing it as a solution to their problem. It's hiding the outside. It's giving somebody that suspended, thought of reality and letting them, focus on the things you want them to focus on. So tying it back in.
Yeah. And the cool thing about it is there are no shortage of problems that people are trying to solve on a daily basis.
It's an understatement.
Well, you're laughing, Craig. Do you have any problems you're looking to solve?
That's an understatement. That's a huge understatement. But go ahead.
So yeah, there's no shortage of problems that people are trying to solve. So if you're out there trying to identify a problem for someone that they've not either identified, and maybe they've not identified because their perspective hasn't been open to the idea that this is something that exists in their business. But if you're out there creating problems on behalf of your customers, you are not helping.
Opposite direction.
So a better approach may be to start asking some questions that might reveal the specific problems that they have that they may not be aware of because they're so focused on the next thing that they're working on, or the last thing that they're working on, or the next 10 things that they need to work on. And this is where listening becomes really, really important. And the reason I wanted Craig to come on and talk a bit about creativity and the creative process, and I want to get into his process around creativity, is that if you can expand your perspective, listen to different types of music, look at different types of art, consume different types of food, whatever it is, but start to expand the spectrum for which you're willing to work in, it's amazing how much more creative and innovative you can be when it comes to putting good things out there. Is that fair, Craig?
Yeah, I think
not really.
No, I do. I think that it's going to kind of slowly leak back to that idea of, I don't know, yes and no.
Uh-oh. So let's give an example of, hey, where might it be risky to allow yourself to venture out and maybe make a mistake of mixing, and I shouldn't even be saying these words, but pastels and oils, because I have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, actually, let's flip it the other way, because I think that's where I was going to kind of touch on is, if I've got my tool and I'm comfortable in my tool, but I'm too comfortable in my tool, I'm not going to end up being creative. I'm not going to stretch outside of that bounds. And I think that's where it gets dangerous is if I am comfortable in my tool and I go to another tool to put something out there, like kind of what we were talking about with the Phenom. I'm tasked with something and it's a hard project. And I'm like, I'm just going to try this new tool over here. I'm just going to do this one and put it out to the world. That's where you start having, things start failing. I think if you were talking about my creative process, I don't really look at the end until I know the tool. And, knowing the tool ahead of time obviously helps that. Then I can kind of start looking at the end. But I am definitely an iterative person. I'm in an industry where the ADDIE model was really big for a very long time. And I fit into that ADDIE model for a very long time. And I hate it. Just had this conversation with one of my coworkers the other day. Iterative process is way more of an advantage. So I think you run into issues where you try something new on something that's going to be really big. You try something new on something small. If I'm going to learn slide guitar, I'm going to learn that not the week I'm playing a slide guitar song in front of 7,000 people in an auditorium. I'm going to, take my own time and learn that on the side, and then kind of ease into it and maybe put one song out there or half a song out there. Did I get off track on that one?
No, I think that was good because the thing I think that was good about it is it really highlights the importance of once you start to do something different, go out there and test.
Yeah.
Get feedback and take those feedback loops so that you can iterate. And I forget, what does ADDIE stand for? I've
forgotten. I've actually erased it from my memory. Develop and design are the D's, and then iterate. Is it iterate? No, it's not. It can't be iterate because I would be loving it. God, it's been so long since I've actually looked at it. I've just moved myself away from it.
We'll find an example of ADDIE, and we'll find the acronym, and we'll drop it into show notes, which is one of those things that absolutely Jen loves. Every time I talk about adding new things.
Okay, here we go. This is what I do on my podcast too. Analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. So evaluation is in there, but there's no circle. There's
it doesn't loop back, does it?
I think it's implied that you're supposed to loop back, but it's not. I think that's one of the big problems I had with it is the develop and design was so heavily weighed upon in that process that, that they really wanted you to do the iterations in development instead of waiting to the end and getting evaluation. And for me, evaluation is involved in that design and development. So I think that's why I had a problem with this model is it doesn't feed back a loop enough to where you get feedback early enough in the process. Then you do evaluation at the end of the process, and then it's kind of almost too late at that point. So
where does Milli Vanilli sit in your list of favorite bands?
So look, let's go back to that Clubhouse talk again. I was challenged by a person in the room on something I said, and I kind of said it the wrong way, but it was also still something that I've taken away quite heavily from that conversation. And if you talk about Milli Vanilli, whatever, that song was popular and I listened to it when it was out. Okay, get it. I made the statement that there's no new music coming out right now that is charged enough, that deals with political attitudes or deals with race issues that's going on in the world right now. And I was challenged, and somebody said, well, there is. And I'm like, okay, it's also it's partly because of my genre that I listen to. I listen to rock on a regular basis. That's not, I don't hide that from anybody. I have started branching out into different sounds a lot lately because of sitting with my wife and watching the Grammys, and they don't even show rock on the Grammys anymore. But there's a couple of musicians that have come out of that have really kind of made me think twice about music, and that being challenged that last time was the same way. And I think that it still ties into that, knowing the tool and being in a groove in that tool. It's the same way with creativity. If you get stuck in one view and one look and one feel, then you're going to just keep replicating that. And you're going to keep moving that through what your output is. So if you're not going out and seeking out new stuff and seeking out new things, Milli Vanilli, you might not be seeing the world. And he was kind of right. I started going out and looking at different music, and I think we came to the conclusion that I really was just too harsh on it, that maybe it's just not in the mainstream and not enough people are seeing it. I don't think that really relates to what we're talking about in business because, what sells and what gets people, on top in business is what it is. I mean, you really have to be on the pulse of what is actually happening, not on the outside. What he was talking about was some of the music that I'm missing is because I might not be searching for it. It's kind of easier to see contemporary look and feel when you're talking about training and when you're talking about stuff, that deals in the work world. But yeah, I was challenged with that. And I was it made me think about my process. It made me think about how, am I looking enough at the other things that are out there? Am I looking at the tools that I'm using thinking, man, these tools are great, but there's no other tools out there, or there's only 3 or 4 other tools out there. And I know what they are, and I'm not too keen on them, but are there really only 3 tools out there? Are there really only 3 other ways of doing this? Or are there really only 4 other ways of doing this? So yeah, I think being challenged on music was quite a hit to it was a reset. It was a reset to me to kind of step back and say, am I really doing what I should be doing to make my output the best?
Well, and sometimes we need those questions, or we need those observations. Yeah. We need that perspective shift to help us identify blind spots that we might have. And at the same time, I was listening to Neil Peart's book, it's Drive, forget the title, but the Neil Peart book, he was talking about how there's a period of time where artists were just creating content to meet the 2 minutes and 30 some odd seconds that it needed to fit into for each of the radio slots. and they weren't actually creating albums that told a story, that brought you through from the beginning of the launch of the album all the way, to the end. And I know we've talked about this before. There are certain songs that absolutely have to be followed by other songs. There's just no other way to listen to those songs. What's an example that comes to mind for you?
I can tell you what's not an example, and a not example is "We Will Rock You," followed by "We Are the Champions." I can't stand that those two songs are played back to back. But I think if you take the entire,
so what follows Eruption?
Well, it's what follows Eruption is the Hot for Teacher.
Come on, man! All right, this is all coming out, and I don't want to embarrass Craig.
If you want a good example, any song on the wall,
we'll pick
any song on the wall by Pink Floyd. You really can't play in singularity. Like you can't play Comfortably Numb in singularity. You can. That's kind of a decent song. Probably a bad one to pick. But like Another Brick in the Wall Part 1, you can't. It needs to be followed by that next drop off and that chain between those two songs.
It has to go through. So follows Eruption is, I think, Girl, you really got me.
You really got me. You're right.
You really got me.
I'm thinking of the other intro.
So we've demonstrated our age and how our memory is going as we continue to age. Craig, so let's talk about this. How do you branch out of your comfort area to find some of these innovative sounds, or identify maybe some innovative tools, because you may have found your 3 perfect tools and now you've grooved yourself into a routine? What's something you do to inspire innovation or inspire exploring other perspectives or other tools?
I think it used to be pretty easy. I think it used to be easy to kind of, look around at the people that you're dealing with, watch a new movie, turn on the TV, just, or the radio and listen to something new. But and this is not an age thing, but as I get older, it seems to be that I reach out less. And again, I don't think it's an age. I think it's a groove thing. I think it's how quickly I can get into a groove. But for me, it's actually using the other tools out there that can give me that. Everybody knows that, people that have Spotify know that when you start listening to music, it starts suggesting music that matches that music. If you're listening to rock, it's going to give you playlists that listens to rock. Well, just below that, there's a what's happening now in music. And you can start grabbing those. And I can guarantee you, from my experience, you're not going to like it right off. You're not going to like it. But you really have to kick yourself and say, just listen, just give it a chance. Just go to that tool and try it. Build something small and try it. Make that phone call and try that different tactic. Almost have to force yourself to do it. But honestly, I think what's done it most for me is having a basis of both friends and work relationships that are willing to do that. Don't surround yourself with people that are, just going to be like, yeah, that tool's the greatest. We should be using that one all the time. Yep, use that one. Have people come into a room in a clubhouse and question you and challenge you to do something different. You and I spent a lot of time working on your video, but it was because you reached out and you said, hey, what am I doing wrong? And I'm not a hesitant person. I'm going to tell you what's wrong. I'm going to tell you what the difference is. And I think putting people like that in your life that can question you is probably the best tool you could have for doing it. I mean, like I said, Spotify gives you the ability to branch out. If you do a search on Google for the top 10, course creation tools, grab the one at the bottom. Don't grab the 3 at the top. Look at the one at the bottom. So you can kind of force yourself into that. But I think having a good support system that can force you into it and challenge you for what you do is probably the best thing you could do.
So let's give people some things that they can go out there and do. We just talked about getting out of your own rut or getting out of the groove as a way to foster creativity. What are 2 other ways that work well for you to inspire or generate creativity? If you've either run into a block, some kind of blocker, or you're talking to someone who just says, hey, I'm not creative.
I would say, unfortunately, we're kind of in a pandemic era where the first one I'm going to say is it's getting to be viable. It's getting there. But I would say go to conferences, go to a conference in your field and just sit and talk to people. I mean, yes, you go to conferences because you want to hear people speak. You want to go to the sessions and speak to people. But those side conversations are very challenging. I work in a field where people that I talk to on a regular basis are kind of using the same tools or doing the same things on a regular basis. But if you go across country and you go to where people are come all over the country, you'll see somebody who's doing something maybe the same way you're doing it, but doing it 10 times faster. And you're like, wow, why are they doing it so much faster? And then you have a conversation with them. You talk it through. You see what their process is. So I would say that putting yourself in an environment like a conference, or maybe it's even going to something local or going to a place, that people are going to be from another area, and dragging that in is probably a good way of doing that. A second one is probably, it's hard to say the right way to do it. But again, it's do searches, do Google searches for something that's in your field, but it's not in your field. Or, it's hard to apply it to everything because you can't do a Spotify list where you can go down and pick a movie. But I even noticed the other day that Netflix has a little button when you sign in now that says, show me something. And all it does is just pick a movie and it throws it up on the screen. And, it does kind of get algorithmic after a while, but that was a great tool for me. It was a great tool to just click on it and say, what are you going to give me? What's going to come out of it? So I think some of it is unfortunately going to just end up falling on you to realize that you're doing it and stretch out. And, it's hard to give somebody that ambition, but if you feel like you're getting in a rut, that's what you need to just start searching.
Does it get better over time?
Yes, it does. I think the more you do it, the more that you stretch out and see what's different out there, the more you're going to find stuff you don't like. I still have not warmed up to country. I probably never will.
Come on.
No
country?
ABC is the music, man. Anything but country. But I still do it from time to time. And I still will, again, that list at the bottom of Spotify is what's hot in pop, what's hot in country, what's hot in blah, blah, blah. I will still click country every once in a while just to see what it comes up as. But it does get easier because I think the more I do it, the more I realize that there's a completely different world of everything out there. No matter what my like is, no matter what my job is, no matter what my hobbies are, somebody out there is doing it different. And as soon as I start searching, I will usually find that person that's doing it.
Craig, as always, these are great conversations. It's good to finally get one of these things on the podcast. So Craig is, a little known secret, Craig is the person who designed the podcast cover art.
Yeah.
He is also the person who designed the Catalyst Sale logo. So Craig, thanks for...
Redesigned.
He redesigned the Catalyst Sale logo. Yep. He got us away from the DNA to now what is everybody out there should know it's the territory plan. It's an exercise in creating clarity and focus, and those handful of perpendicular lines that come together with an area of focus in the sea. And you'll see the detail that Craig put in to building that out. Craig, where can people find out more about what you're doing and connect with you if they'd like to do so? You
can find me on LinkedIn, Craig Sybert, Sybert. On Twitter, it's Craig_Sybert, at Craig_Sybert. Envolve Media, ENVOLVE media.com is our website. That's where I work. I'm a systems, I do stuff at that place about Adobe, blanking on what I do right now. I also have a podcast, Music Musing. So if you do music_musing on Twitter or music musing _, I don't remember which it is. Just go to musicmusing.com or Libsyn at musicmusing.com. You'll be able to find it. But that's all the places you can find me.
We'll include links in the show notes. Craig, thanks as always for the awesome discussion.
My pleasure.
If you know of anybody who would find value in listening to this discussion, please share the podcast with them. Comment to Craig and I so we know that know who shared it. And as we wrap up, sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?